Alright, hey everyone, welcome back, and today I'm going to be covering the 5th game from the Japan Open, and at this point in the tournament I was on 4 out of 4, and I was playing my first, higher rated player in this tournament. So basically, in this tournament I was like the 4th seed out of 50 or so players. Yeah, the 4th seed. And I was playing the top seed this round, who is an IM, I think one of Japan's 2 international masters, and he's a very solid player. I've played him a couple times over the years. I've never beat him before. I've always been the underdog player, and his style does actually somewhat resemble mine, and we actually have played many of the same opening lines over the years. And one of my openings I played in my second game actually was like for the knight g6 line, the Karakhan, if you saw that, that was actually an idea that I first saw in one of his games in like a Japan Championship a couple of years ago, and I thought like, oh, that line actually looks pretty good because I saw him win pretty convincingly with it. But anyhow, game straight into things. I played one d4. He played d5, c4. Um, and his main opening over the years has been the Slav defense with c6, and I've played into this a couple times with him. I played the exchange Slav most of the times. I wasn't necessarily playing for a draw. That was kind of what I played against Slav at that time. And both of those games, unfortunately, though, I lost. And uh, because the thing is, it's like even though the positions might have a draw tendency, he's just very good at playing those sort of like symmetrical positions where you might be slightly worse, but he can just somehow like grind you down. So instead, you play e6, and we have the Queen's Gambit decline. But after this, we enter the Catalan, and it's funny because the next 3 games, the last 3 games of the tournament, they were all Catalans, which was really interesting, like from white and black. And okay, he played d takes c4 though, and this is kind of during my preparation, I looked at this a bit. I was expecting e6, like here, and then I wasn't exactly sure what line would get here. And I looked at his online Blitz games, and I saw him play a couple different lines. I saw like he was entering like some Catalan lines like this, and he was playing like b6 and all that good stuff. And I think there was another line after d takes c4 he was playing here, but I can't quite remember. But one thing I noticed he was playing quite a bit actually was this line bishop b4 check, and after bishop d2, a5, castles queen c2. This is a bit of an accurate move, or I won't get into the details here, but basically the main move here I believe is, what's the main move actually? I think it's takes, and the idea is if knight takes here, then they get b5 and they keep the extra pawn. But instead, the main move here is actually to play queen takes d2. And the idea is now as of b5, we can play a4, c6, take, and there's queen g5, and you fork these 2 pawns. So instead, what they do here is they usually play c6, prepare b5, and actually no way, maybe b5 here we just go queen g5 immediately. Because of that they go c6 first, and then after a4, b5, then we get that line here. So instead they do stuff here like I think knight e4 is a thing, queen b6 minus will be a thing. Yeah, and there is some theory here I don't exactly remember, but when I was preparing for this game I made sure I kind of knew what I was doing here. But instead he had this really rare idea which he'd played in a couple of Blitz games, and I fortunately looked at it before the game, and the engine actually seemed to think it's pretty decent. It's move c5, and the idea is basically just to strike back in the center and create counterplay. But the thing is that, but the reason I think why this is kind of rare is because it creates some kind of potential long-term weaknesses on the light squares around the queen side, and as we'll see throughout the game, this actually plays quite an important role. And during my preparation, right, I saw that there were kind of 2 different main moves we could play here. One was d takes c5, and the other was queen takes c4. And I decided I want to play queen takes c4. He plays b6. The idea is simply that he's going to probably play his bishop here, trying to get counterplay in my queen here. And if like you're just careless here and you play castles after bishop a6, we might very well just be dropping this pawn here. So instead, what I decided to do is, in my preparation, I had already looked at this. I decided I want to take on c5, and here plays. Actually, here, this is where he has a bit of a decision to make, and the thing is, objectively here, the best move for black is to play bishop a6. And I wasn't so sure if he'd go into this, because after queen d4, Black is more or less forced to exchange queens here. He can't like move his queen somewhere like here or something, for example, because then I just take on b6 and now I'm like, what, 2 pawns up? So of course he wouldn't allow this. Instead, he'd probably take back on c5 like this. If he plays queen takes d4, this would be a bit problematic because then this rook's being attacked and you can't win back the pawn. So he'd probably play bishop takes c5, allow this queen trade, where his king is kind of sidelined d8 and can't castle anymore, but with the queens off, that's not a big deal. Basically, we get this position where I think the engine says it's around equal, but I felt with these kind of light squares, kind of might have some long-term slight weaknesses to kind of argue I have some sort of advantage. But in reality, I feel like he'd probably hold that sort of position. However, instead he played bishop takes c5, and although it's not like a terrible move, it definitely allows me to gain some like very short-term initiative and get my pieces into sort of more optimal positions. And how this starts is I go knight e5 first. Just simply move my knight to a more active square and gain the tempo on the black rook here. And he played rook a7, and this kind of thing might look a bit strange if you've never seen it before, but actually the rook isn't that badly placed here. It can very quickly swing around to a square like c7 and kind of put pressure on c4. This queen's in a bit of an awkward situation then. So rook a7 is a very kind of typical move in these sort of positions here where black has played a5. And in the game I just simply played queen a4 check. Well, maybe not simply, but I had already looked at this, so for me it was kind of just like, you just play it. But I actually didn't play it immediately because I was like, just trying to make sure I was in prep, and I also didn't want to exactly give away that I already knew all this stuff in some sense, but yeah, it was definitely feeling alright around here. My opponent hadn't spent a whole lot of time either. And you play knight fd7 here, just blocking the check, and here I didn't exactly remember what to do. I remembered one thing for sure is that I'm not taking here and just letting black take like this. Then I have to move my queen somewhere, and black would maybe already exchange bishops like this. And under these sort of circumstances, yeah, my position, I don't like it that much. Black's knight could come to d4 very quickly, gain some initiative. My kind of like light square diagonal here, where my kind of kingside shelter in general is a lot weaker now, considering I've traded off my light square bishops. So this is something that I should definitely avoid, but and especially in general, when you just take into account the fact that my knight's a lot more like kind of an active piece and black has played like a passive move backwards like this, it doesn't really make much sense to make that sort of trade and say, was like, I know I should bring my knight back to d3. The only dilemma though was that I wasn't sure in which way I should do this, because if you've noticed, I can also play knight c3. I don't have to my knight immediately because well, black can't exactly take my knight here in e5 because that's illegal. So instead here though, I was like thinking, maybe if I could do this, this might actually be like a smart move, or because maybe if black castles here, I can get like knight b5 and maybe I can be tricky and win material or something. I'm not sure if this exactly works. Maybe it doesn't, but one reason I sort of rejected this line, which was a really faulty kind of reason, was after bishop a6, was that, and by the way, I think here the best move might just be bishop b7, which is very similar to what happened in the game, and here I'd probably just exchange bishops, castle, and after castles, I think this is a direct transposition. So, but instead, this bishop a6 idea is very typical, and here I wasn't sure if knight b5, if, now I'm attacking his rook, by the way, and if I take, he takes, sorry, I take back to the queen, and this sort of trade would be very beneficial for me because now I have just a very strong unopposed light squared bishop. Using light squares around the queen side are really starting to kind of show themselves. But instead here, what I was slightly concerned about, but very rationally speaking, so I guess, because after, my reason was that he could play maybe knight takes e5. Again, I wasn't really sure, and my idea was after knight takes a7 check, king e7, and my knight kind of looks a bit weird here. I'm not castled yet. I can't castle now because then I hang this bishop. So I was like, I don't know if I'm actually so sure about whether this position is good. Black's kind of bishop's really active here. Maybe he'll have something. But in reality, there's like a billion different moves here that are just winning for white. One is like rook d1. This is very simple. I'm protecting this bishop, preparing castles next. And apparently there's just not many problems here. Or any problems at all. So It was like pot 4 or something, by the way, so yeah, definitely not something to be too concerned about. But again, looking back on it, the engine was like, both of these moves are objectively equal. However, my reason as to why I picked knight d3 over knight c3, well, objectively it didn't matter too much. It was kind of a bit shitty, honestly, so not too proud of that. But anyways, continuing on, we had this. And here, I should also note that an important reason to play knight c3 first instead of castles is that if we castle first, and bishop a6 is very annoying to deal with, because when this bishop attacks this knight here, it's basically saying, I'm going to take, like if I play knight d3, I'm just going to take here, and this pawn is a long-term weakness, which is not that easy to deal with. And it's like, to avoid that, I probably have to play something passive like queen c2, but I don't really want to do this. This just makes developing a lot easier for black here. Maybe you can play like rook c7 even, or even just bishop b7, just retaining the bishop pair if you really want, but not many problems here. b5 can be coming next maybe, and once black plays b5, we should also note that this pawn is no longer a backward pawn, and also it's just kind of going towards creating some more space on the queen side. Definitely that's kind of, once black plays b5, that's the sort of moment when you really start to question whether white even has an advantage anymore. But anyways, because of that reason, I decided to play knight c3 first. You might be wondering, how does this counter bishop a6? And the idea is that now bishop a6, I can make use of the fact that my knight's already in c3 and play knight b5 now. And this is similar to the situation I was showing earlier, but of course now my knight's not hanging on e5, but in the specific variation we saw that didn't really matter. And the problem here though is that black can't really move their rook anywhere because my bishop's being a pain in the ass on this diagonal. My knight's also covering the square. So black more or less has to take here, and as I already discussed, this sort of position is just excellent for white. So instead what my opponent did, he of course saw that, he played bishop b7 here. And here I more or less have to trade. I could castle and let him take my bishop like this, but I wasn't so sure if objectively this was better than like taking his bishop here like this, but eventually I saw them just taking the bishop like this because I was a bit concerned that somehow, somewhere, this king being exposed on g2 might lend black a useful check in the future or somewhere along this diagonal, and maybe that could be costly. So I just decided to take on b7. Again, objectively it didn't matter so much, but just these kind of small things that you never really notice. So I just decided, let's just take here, castle, bishop e7, bring my rook in, and he plays bishop e6, sorry, knight a6, and this is kind of the first position in the game where we really start, or I really start thinking, I should say, because black has a very kind of simple plan here. They're going to move their queen out somewhere like b8 or maybe even a8, and then they're going to bring the rook to probably somewhere like c8, and then play knight ac5, try to trade stuff, maybe even push their queenside pawns, and it's not exactly clear how they're going to play for a win. Probably you would expect this to just kind of end in the draw, probably, if black does everything right. And I wasn't exactly sure how I deal with all of this, because it's like, okay, black kind of has this weak pawn here on b6, it's a backward pawn, and they have these weak white squares, but it's not that obvious how to exploit them. And here I decided to play bishop e3, which in hindsight I think was a bit inaccurate, because my idea was to kind of target this square and just try and make it so that, let's say if queen b8, I played rook ac1 here, but my idea was if black tried to play something like this, I'd probably, actually no, I was thinking like in the position like rook d8, probably not even this, but let's say this, I played knight e4 in the game, and here if you play something like knight c5, my idea was, it was this sort of position I was sort of aiming for, where I'll be like, okay, we can exchange all these pieces, maybe you even take here, and then we get some sort of position like this, where, okay, I can take here, and this is actually just a free pawn, because note that if they take that pawn on b2, I get this sort of back rank mate. However, let's just say, like, strategically speaking, this sort of pawn structure, I felt long term, I expect this to be good for me. I have some targets, and I'm playing for pretty risk-free advantage, I felt. So this is kind of, when I played bishop e3, this is the sort of thing that I was sort of looking for. But in reality, I think that my bishop was just better placed on f4, and The reason is that it controls some important squares in this diagonal. It makes it a bit more difficult for black to bring his knight back to c7, which he ended up doing later on in the game. It's just a bit more loose there when my bishop's attacking it. And gives some more like tactical opportunities. So yeah, and when it was on e3, it's sort of like it's serving a very shallow purpose, which I thought it was serving, but in reality it wasn't really, because after like queen b8, because in a lot of situations where black actually puts a knight in c5, making all these trades, it wasn't really necessary, and my position would have been more or less fine if I didn't have to make those trades. So instead, what I should have done was just put my bishop on f4, control this diagonal, and yeah, I don't know, bishop e3 just felt a bit artificial. So instead he played I don't know why I said instead, but he played queen b8, and this is kind of what I expected, just him to bring his rook to c8 next, then try to play knight c5. And here once again I was now considering bishop f4, which is a bit strange since I just moved my bishop, but my idea was that if he played e5, now that like I'm sort of trying to provoke him to push his pawn like this, I could play knight d5, bring my knight forward for tempo, make use of the fact that his pawn isn't covering the square anymore, and I'm also attacking his bishop, so if he takes like this, I can just win a pawn like this, and I'm pretty happy about life. However, the problem here is that he doesn't have to take my bishop on e4, and like you might be thinking, what if he moves the bishop here? And something like this I wasn't at all opposed to. I could just move my bishop back. My knight's in a pretty decent post from which it's not easy to remove it from. So I kind of expected him, well, I don't know, to go like bishop d6 if we did reach this position, but I completely overlooked the fact here that he has knight d5. And once again, kind of showing the fact that his rook can actually be quite useful on the 7th rank here. It's actually protecting his bishop here on e7 once his knight moves out of the way. And my queen's under attack now, and my bishop's under attack. So I'm actually just screwed here and I'm losing the piece. I didn't see this at all. So I'm kind of happy in some sense I didn't play bishop f4, because I feel like if he played e5 I wouldn't be arrogant, and I would have played like knight d5 immediately just to show off, and I would have blundered the piece, which would have been really sad. However, I was lucky that didn't happen, but if we did reach the position, I wouldn't have to do knight d5 immediately, of course. I could just go back and retreat my bishop to e3, and this square on d5, it is indeed a long-term weakness, and I think I'd be pretty happy here. So instead, I decided to play rook ac1 basically, and well, okay, I should say the reason though I didn't go for bishop f4 was I actually wasn't so sure if the bishop d6, if such a trade was beneficial to me. I thought that once I trade the bishops off, for some reason that makes it more difficult for me, but that just doesn't seem to be the case at all. Because after something like knight e4, queen e7, rook ac1, I just gain a very nice initiative, and my rooks are on some nice squares here on this sort of files. It's not at all easy for black to bring his pieces into the game actually, so something like this shouldn't really be scaring me off exactly. Instead though, I think after something like queen a8, black is still reasonably solid. And here my opponent took a bit of a think here, and I was kind of just expecting him to play like rook c8 pretty quickly. Again, I discussed this like knight c5 stuff earlier. I think if he played this here, I wasn't exactly intending to like take here. I was sort of just planning to keep the tension a bit with queen b5, and it's not easy for black to really move here, so I was like, you know, if he takes here, this allows me to activate my rook a bit more, and something like this I felt pretty okay with. And if he goes rook c8, I was okay. Here I actually wasn't so sure what I was going to do. Once again, I was sort of considering bishop f4, the idea of the e5 knight d5, but again I just overlooked knight dc5 I think here, which is really kind of stupid. But you know, occasionally, you know, you're gonna miss things, and I think coming into this tournament my calculation just wasn't that sharp. I hadn't done a whole lot of like targeted training for my calculations, so kind of my fault I guess. But yeah, again e5, just go bishop e3, I have a slight advantage there, maybe a bit more. But again, I didn't take queen a that seriously, and this is probably indeed black's best move here. And here once again though, I was kind of considering bishop d6, But in this case, I actually knew that this for sure wouldn't be that good, which is why I was considering it a bit more seriously here, this whole bishop f4 thing, because here I saw that concretely after queen takes d6 like this, I have knight e4, knight b5 also works, we'll see why, because after knight e4, this queen's under attack, and, well, their rook's under attack, so they have to move their queen to defend the rook, queen b8, takes, and knight d6, and now I'm winning the exchange here because I'm forking the queen and rook here. And of course, if the knight was on b5, it could also come to d6 and do the exact same thing. So I saw that stuff, but again, I think it might have been e5 that put me off. I'm actually not so sure here. I think here, I probably actually saw queen a8. I'm not sure though. I can't have to remember. It was like 2 weeks ago this game now. So yeah, he played rook d8 though, and this surprised me. I was not expecting this at all. And you know, I'm not really sure what the whole idea is. I mean, in some sense, it's not like rocket science or anything. It's like I guess has some potential here in the open file. Yeah, once again, like in these positions, I was spending like 10 moves on each move, and I just wasn't sure what I was really doing. I was like kind of just messing around here. I played 94, as we saw a bit earlier, and I thought this was good because I'm just kind of like being a maniac and controlling all these squares, and I'm like, how can black move? And then he played this move queen e8, which really just confused me. I'm like, because I just didn't understand the idea. It's like, I'm trying to figure out what my opponent's idea is so I can prevent it, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't even see his idea, so how can I prevent something I don't see, right? And so eventually I just kind of settled on a3 because I figured that maybe, on the off chance that his idea is to activate the knight with knight b4, take, and like, I don't know, play a takes b4, and open his file for the queen here. On the off chance that was his idea, I'm like, I'm just going to be a prick and play a3 and stop the idea. And not only that, but I felt that genuinely this wasn't just some stupid like pawn move on the side, that I could play b4 and further restrict this knight in a6. Because one thing you have to understand here is that if my opponent never brings this knight in, like, I don't know, tries to exchange it or something, this knight in a6 is just kind of shit there, like, being quite frank, honestly, because like, what's it doing on the side of the board? It doesn't really do a whole lot right. And if my pawn comes to b4 and controls this square, then that's kind of eliminating one of black's knight's like only chances to get into the game. But as we'll see quite soon, actually, that was I was missing another route for the knight to come into the game with knight c7 and then to d5, which I don't know how I missed that really, but again, that was another reason, as I mentioned earlier, why this bishop was probably slightly better on the f4 square. But anyways, after a3, my opponent played another move which was really kind of, well, this one wasn't as mysterious. It was h6, and I understood this. At this point, I really kind of saw that we were playing this sort of like tricky waiting game. We were just kind of playing these small moves, and at this point, he had definitely also gained a bit of a time advantage. I think I was maybe down like 10 to 15 minutes on the clock here, which a bit of a problem. I was spending way too much time in these positions where, like, the consequences of the moves I play is not huge, and I was really trying to find how I could maximize my advantage, or at least try and retain some sort of edge and put pressure on him, but I just didn't really seem to be doing it, right? And I think in this position was really where things started drifting. I played rook d2, and I think this was too slow. My idea, of course, is to, well, it's not exactly obvious, because I could either be doubling up on the c file here, or I could be doubling up on the d file, and I wasn't even sure myself which one I was going to do. I was just trying to stay flexible, right? And maybe even I could slide my queen back to d1. That's another idea. But here I think was where I really should have started considering other stuff. For example, queen c6 was something pretty decent. Just trying to activate the queen, put in a more active square, and try and put pressure on like stuff around here and hope something happens, right? And in this position, there was one nice variation actually to illustrate why my queen could be so useful on c6. But first, I'll actually show you what happened in the next moves in the game here. After I played rook d2, my opponent first played knight c7, once again using that route for the knight, which I just mentioned. And here, I had to be very kind of wary of the knight coming to d5 here, and I didn't want to allow his knight to get there, because quite frankly, once it gets there, I was like, I don't know how to get rid of it, and it's really active there. So I was like, okay, I'm going to play knight f4, attacking this knight here on d7, while also controlling the d5 square of my knight here. So here he plays b5, and as I was mentioning earlier, once black gets in b5, this pawn's no longer backward here. This pawn, well, the square here on b5, it's now occupied by a pawn, and it's no longer so weak. Black has really good control over that, and I don't really have much of an advantage anymore, but it's more to do with the fact that after queen d1, which I played in the game, still keeping the pressure on this knight here, here I only really looked at knight e5, and I saw that after something like this, we make a bunch of exchanges, I'm going to get knight d6, I attack the rook, and you can't even like go to these squares here because my bishop's controlling them, so it's just like rook b8, and I'm like, I felt like surely this sort of position where I'm gaining a bunch of tempers and stuff, I have an initiative, this should somehow be good for me, and I think the engine also backed that up. He's like +1 here or something around there, and yeah, it's sort of understandable. It's not easy for black to activate any of his pieces. His bishop can't move here really, or maybe like if it comes like say I play h4 hypothetically. If it comes here, then okay, like sure you can take this, but maybe I can go for like an in between move of knight takes f7. And now if I do this, I'm like winning the pawn, right? So yeah, it's not easy to move the bishop for that reason, because this knight's sort of a bit loose. It's also not that easy to move the knight somewhere like here. Goes there, for example, I take there, and he gets like an isolated pawn, which is once again a long-term weakness. And it's like, if you can't activate those pieces, it's very difficult to really do anything, because those pieces are the problem pieces that black has. So instead, what my opponent came up with was a very nice move here, knight e8, and this completely I did not see. And the idea is quite simple. Once again, the rook is quite useful on the 7th rank. He is defending the knight, and is simply preparing to, well, as we saw in the other variation, the problem was that in this sort of position, he just had no control of the d6 square, which made it very easy for me to infiltrate it. But now, if we look at the same position, if knight e5 and we make a bunch of exchanges there, this knight controls the d6 square. Sorry, bad arrow. And I actually, quite frankly, have no advantage here. Like, during the game, I felt like I should have something maybe, but I couldn't see anything. And so I was happy after the game, at least, when I looked in the engine confirmed my suspicions, and I was like, yeah, bro, like, yeah, buddy, just equal here. So that was a slight relief that I didn't miss anything like here, but at the same time, it was like, yeah, I wasn't so happy the fact that I kind of screwed up this sort of like these last few moves and let black kind of get away with quality here. So that leads me to a few moves ago why queen c6 might have been pretty decent actually, because here, if black tries to go for the same thing here with knight c7, we can play knight f4, and if black tries to once again, well, they can't move their knight to any of these squares, so if they try to go to knight e8 and try to play this knight e5 thing, we have this really bizarre tactic here with bishop takes b6. And this just works like clockwork here, because if black takes this, the piece that way, then, well, we're a pawn up here, we're attacking this bishop, pretty active. And if they play knight takes b6, we can play rook takes d8, and if they play bishop takes d8, then this knight's hanging, we take this with check. Once again, we're a pawn up, very nice initiative. Black's king feels a little iffy, and if they take with the queen here, then they hang the rook. So in both situations, well, I don't know, multiple situations, but in all of these lines, white is winning material, which is really shows the power of how this queen can play a big influence once it gets on this active square here. And yeah, I just did not, well, see any of those lines, quite frankly. Because, you know, it's one thing to consider queen d6 and have your intuition be like, yeah, I think there's something there. But it's another thing to kind of, you know, see, like, from afar, like, in this position, oh, Iron Bishop takes b6, of course I'm winning. Like, if you're Magnus, then sure, it's easy, but maybe not even him, right? But, yeah, not that easy to see. But queen c6, the idea, or even something like queen b5, I think this is definitely something that I should have been aiming for. Like, here the idea is quite simple, just straight up stop him from doing this, and if they go knight c7, maybe, yeah, maybe I can't do this actually. No, I think because, yeah, queen b5 was something I wanted to do, but then knight c7, knight d5, and it actually comes with tempo, this is even worse. Never mind. So, yeah, instead we went for this stuff in the game, and all of a sudden after knight e8, I was like, I couldn't see anything, so I decided to trade pieces off, And we got to this position where a bunch of exchanges happened. I didn't think I had any advantage at this point because black had... I thought that maybe I could somehow exploit these pawns, but I didn't feel like I had a real advantage here. And then I played queen c2. I was more or less just trying to exchange queens. I couldn't see a way for black to avoid this, and the point is that after something like rook d7, which my opponent played in the game, we make some exchanges. Here after rook c5, I thought the black has to play something like rook b7 maybe, and just play passively defending these kind of overextended pawns, you could argue. And yeah, I was like, okay, I should draw this pretty easily. And something I didn't think about during the game so much was that maybe I could even play a sort of position for a win. And I think also my psychology in some sense, because like if I was playing this against a low red player, I'd be thinking of like any way to try and like somehow win this position. Just because my opponent's an IM, for some reason I was like thinking, yeah, like, I don't know, he's better here or something. Not better, but like he's gonna try and grind me out. So I wanted to find a more like queen way to just try and like dissolve any chances of that and just try and draw the position straightforwardly. And so from this position, I saw that I did this move a4, and if he plays b4 advancing the pawn, I take this for free, and if he takes this, I go rook takes a5, and if he takes like this, I do this, and actually no, because I noticed in this position actually that he is g5, and this is a bit annoying because he needs a pawn up. So I noticed that, and then I was like, okay, I can play knight d3 first actually. And the idea is quite simple now. I'm defending this pawn, and can't really defend this pawn. Well, you can, but now I go after this pawn, and he can't defend this, and I'm just equal material here. I'm gonna draw this pretty easily. However, instead of this, he might have noticed, I'm not sure, but he played g5, and after knight d3 went rook d5. And here I was considering two moves. One, taking on d5, and two, rook c7 to avoid the rook trade. And after the game, the engine was yelling at me to play f3. And this is something which I just did not consider. And again, if I was playing a lower rated player, this is something that I'm not saying I would have certainly considered, but definitely the chance I would have seen this is probably a bit higher. And it's a sort of trap we fall into once again. It's like when playing higher rated players, it's like you sort of forget about moves which we might see normally, but under these sort of circumstances we just forget about. And here keeping attention is just the best way to go about things, because if he takes my rook, I can just take back. And he has to be very careful because I can go like knight b7, harass this pawn, then also come around back to d6 and fork these pawns if he like pushes this pawn here. Oh my god, those arrows are horrendous, but you get the picture. And so instead, it's kind of a bit awkward for him, and also my king can come in very quickly now. And I think the engine was saying around +1 this position is, so I'm actually fairly happy in that sort of scenario, but instead, I got down fairly on time here, and then I took on d5, and he played knight takes d5, and this knight ending should just be a dead draw. It should be a dead draw. I played e4, and here I played knight b6, and one thing I sort of saw here was if he plays knight f6, then here I could really start consider the play for a win here, because after knight c5, this is a really cool move actually, because I defend this pawn with my knight, and I also restrict his knight's activity on d7 like this, and I felt in this little position like maybe I'm actually winning here. I don't know the evaluation, I haven't checked this, but I'm sure white does have some sort of advantage here. Instead though, he played knight b6, and he doesn't give me any of that, which is unfortunate, but what can you expect when you play like against these IM guys, right? And here, I really freaking regret what I did. It wasn't losing, but it made my life a lot more difficult, and I don't like things that make my life more difficult, right? Here I played f4. And the problem is after knight c4, we get in this awkward position here, right? Where I can't advance any of my pawns because, well, if I advance this pawn like this, he wins this pawn, and maybe this isn't the end of the world, you could argue, but it doesn't really change the situation a whole lot either. He could also play b4, but no, I think this is probably okay for me if I get this sort of situation. But, like, that's aside from the point. I don't think I should play a4 and give the pawn up like that. But I can't also play b3, like trying to kick this knight away, because now I can take on a3. And so, with that in mind, it actually would have been better for me to just straight up stop him from coming to c4 and putting long-term pressure on these pawns and basically immobilizing them, because I should also note that although in this position after f4, knight c4, my knight's defending this pawn, my knight's in a very kind of awkward situation where it's kind of blocking my king from coming into a natural square like d3 on the queen side and the center, I guess, because my knight has to kind of sit on d3 and defend his pawn. My pawn in b2 has to sit there and defend the pawn a3. So it's kind of like ripple effect where one thing kind of defends the other, and then because of that, like none of them can move, and I'm sort of immobilized like that. So that really sucked. That's why I wanted to play. Actually, like during the game, I was like kind of thinking, but like a few moves down the road, like I'm like, why the hell did I not play b3 here? This would have been really good. Because now his knight can come here, doesn't have any easy entries. And if he does something like this, now I can take, and he plays pawn takes, then I can play knight c5, and his knight's actually stuck defending this pawn now, but okay, he can just like trade like this, and should be a relatively simple draw. So instead I played f4 though, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to play something like e5, king f3, king e4, with my king in, you know, we're good. However, I just completely underestimated the dangers here of this position after g4, and it was here I really started to realize that I can't just walk my king in to like e2 and just kind of expect like to be okay, because I noticed after something like this, for example, anytime my king kind of gets too close to the queen side like this, like maybe h5 here, I'm in danger of just losing my kingside pawns like this and having black quickly storm their kingside pawns down and promote. So yeah, I just basically was like, I don't think I can bring my king over to the queen side that easily. In fact, in this sort of condition, I don't think I can bring it over at all. And it was in this kind of moment I started panicking, because I also realized, like, let's say I just shuffle my king around. I played king g2 in the game, but my idea was to play h3 here. But let's say I just shuffle my king back here, and he brings his king around, and we get some sort of position like this. My concern was that he's going to play f5, and if I play e5 check, he just brings his king in to d4 or something, whatever. He's going to bring his king in, my knight is stuck, my king can't really protect it. Well, it can maybe, but you know, I'm sort of in Zugzwang here after h5. It's like, I can't move my king, I can't move my knight, I can't move this pawn, I can't move this pawn, I can't move shit. So, and also, like, if I take here, this again doesn't really change the situation because the king can run in anyway. So this sort of thing in the long term was what I was looking at, and really like had me like concerned shitless, honestly. So instead here though, like, yeah, once again I played h3, but this doesn't really change the nature of the position that much, because after h5 he still has this option of playing f5 later down the road. So I pretty much hedged all my money on this idea after king f2, king f6, king e2, king e7, the fact that now when this king is on e7, I can play knight e5. And if knight takes b2, I can play knight c6 check and fork the king and pawn here. But we actually got to this position, right? And I wasn't so sure though if like king e7 isn't forced or something. Like, I was thinking maybe if he took this route here or something, like he could avoid knight c6 with check. I'm not too sure, honestly. Yeah, I have to look at this more for the engine. I haven't analyzed this that deeply, I guess, but essentially I was quite happy when we got to this position, because I kind of whisked out 95 here, and I was like, this I think is a draw. Because he plays knight takes e5 here. Not knight takes b2, but knight takes e5. And we get this position. I have double pawns, but his king can't infiltrate anywhere. And he can't really make use of this weakness. Like, if he brings his king around here, like, where's he entering, right? b4, a4. This is just a draw. It's gonna like shuffle back and forth, right? And I don't know, if he plays f6 here, I mean, like, what's that gonna do? It's take, and draw. So knight takes e5 I was not all concerned about, but knight takes b2 I was very uncertain about this. And I was looking at some variations right after, like knight c6 check, king d6 takes, and king c5. Sorry, I need to redraw those arrows. King c5 here. I saw his king kind of coming into d4 next, and I couldn't really see what to do in that sort of position. And I thought I was actually just lost. And because of that, I was like, maybe I'll bring my king to d2 first, and if he plays something like, let's say he just plays a blade move like this, I can kick his knight around a bit. I can play something like king c2, and he plays knight c4, I can take, and then I win this pawn, and maybe his king's too far away in this hypothetical variation because I can maybe even snatch up this pawn and be winning, which should not happen. But so instead though, I think what probably would have happened is something like knight e4 in this exact position, but again I can play knight c6 here, and I can kind of scoop up this pawn. But this is like knight c5, and I have to be a bit more careful because this pawn's being targeted actually, so maybe it's not that simple, but you get the sort of idea. I was trying to be tricky and kick that knight around a bit. And the thing is with king d2, right, is that you can't really bring the king in immediately, because if you do this, then this pawn hangs, right? So, and this pawn g4 is also something which you should keep in mind. Although these pawns are quite dangerous, my king is now a bit closer to the action there, and it can actually probably hold those pawns down. And unfortunately though, well, actually, I should first say that after knight c6 check here, king d6, knight takes a5, king c5, I missed the idea here that, well, king e3, knight c4 check, I think I probably missed that, but that is winning for black. And if I don't do that, it's like, what do I do, right? It doesn't look that easy to stop king d4, but I have this very nice idea, knight b7, king d4, and knight d6. And I'm attacking these pawns here, and I'm also importantly defending this pawn e4. And this I completely missed. I wish I saw this. This would have been a really... Like intuitively when I play knight c6, when I saw this whole variation, I assumed knight c6 is probably a draw, but then when I got here, I just wasn't sure. Wrong position. Yeah, I wasn't sure in this sort of position after king c5. This looked really scary. So that's why I played king d2, right? And unfortunately, this just... Knight c6 check here actually after knight a4. This was the wrong move. Here I should have taken on g4, and I was already down to playing on the increment at this point. I had like 30 seconds also, and yeah, this is what I should have gone for at this point. I should have just brought my king over like this, and I probably overlooked the fact here. I think I saw king b3, and I probably noticed that he's winning the pawn here by forking the king and the pawn here. But here I have a4, a very nice timely move here, and it's making use of the fact that this pawn can't move because the knight hangs, so the knight has to do something passive like this maybe to defend this, and maybe I can even play like e5 and be ambitious, but maybe he takes this, but I don't know, I also get that. Instead though, yeah, I played knight c6 check, and here I didn't think there was that much to be afraid of, but again, I hadn't really calculated all the variations, so I just felt like my king's a bit closer, his knight's like not as good of a square, so I just kind of assumed this was okay. But then I realized in this position after knight c5, he's attacking this pawn, and if I bring my king over to defend the pawn, he goes king c7, and my knight is in a really precarious situation because every single square it can go to is controlled by black, and I was scared shitless here because after this, my knight is trapped. However, his knight is also under attack by my king, so it wasn't like that clear that this was losing for me. Because it's like if he moves his knight away to then try and take my knight, then I can slide my knight back, right? But in this position, he also has this idea knight takes e4. And if I take with my king like this, he takes my knight like this, and then he's just at the pawn up endgame where he's going to quickly scoop up this pawn and then run his pawn down like this, and he's winning. And I played the wrong move in the game here. I actually have a saving move which I didn't see. I thought that after e5 here, which apparently is a saving move here, that I'm losing because still knight e4, and even though he's not winning the pawn, this pawn's being attacked on g3 here, and I was like, okay, takes, he's running his king down, then promoting the pawn. My counterplay on this side of the board is just not quick enough for moves like f5. But if you'd like to challenge yourself, I suggest pausing the video here and try to find a move that white can play to actually hold the position. And if you've tried, the move is knight c4 check. Giving the check to the king, probably has to take, and then I take here, and the point is this position is a draw with the outside pass pawn here. Black can't like play something like this. I just, well, bring my king back or something like this, and this position should be a draw. Maybe I'm even like winning by some miracle, I don't know, but yeah, this position should be a draw basically. Maybe it's in my file. I have this. Okay, apparently this is draw. That makes sense. But instead, I played f5, and this is not a draw. I kind of hoped that by exchanging those pawns and maybe getting my king active, I may be holding it. But that's just not true, because after this, I'm 2 pawns down, and we get this sort of situation here where my king sort of looks in range of this pawn, and is sort of attacking this pawn, but in reality, it can't take either of those pawns, because if I go for the e6 pawn, then this pawn runs, and if I try to hold into this pawn, then this pawn's slowly going to come forward. So basically in this position, I'm just losing. And after a few more moves, I just resigned because I bonded this. Not that I could have saved myself, because after this, of course, it's just wasn't exchanged knights like this, so I resigned here. And this was a painful loss for me, because I was like, you know, I was pressing for love of the game. I felt like there's no way that he could possibly win this sort of position. All my pieces are just, they're active. He has some small weaknesses which I can maybe exploit if I'm skilled enough to do so. And like, how does he win this sort of position? Especially when you get down to like this sort of ending that's like, this looks like the most drawn thing on friggin' planet Earth, right? And then only like, what, 2 moves later, I allow him this, and this was really where things started to go downhill. And even this position, I think, is probably still holdable, but it's these small things when you're playing these really strong players that can really just screw you over. And I think this is the kind of thing that I need to be a bit more careful of in this tournament. It was really, like in this tournament, I didn't have any like big screw ups against these stronger players. What I did do wrong, however, was in these sort of endings, I just wasn't careful, and that really cost me big time. Like here, I really should have considered b3 instead of playing f4, and it's carelessness like this, man. And also time management was a thing as well. Like, I don't know, in these sort of positions, like I was just spending like 10 minutes per move, really unnecessary. Something I need to deal with if I want to like try and beat these stronger players, right? So yeah, but anyways, I hope you found this analysis useful. If you stuck around until the end, I think this is like 40 minutes long or something. I'll try and edit this down a bit, but yeah, a lot to digest here. Very kind of simple looking position, but yeah, I don't know. Anyways, I hope if you enjoyed this, you could leave a like on the video though, and subscribe to the channel for more game analysis videos like this in the future. And anyways, until next time, I will see you.